What if I told you the most reliable hit-making machine of the early 1980s was born in the shadow of tragedy? They carried a dead man's legacy before they ever built one of their own. A band that started with $100 and 100 nights of suffering. Then the radio found them. Then the arenas filled. Then, quietly, without warning, the world moved on. This is the rise and fall of 38 Special. Jacksonville, Florida. The late 1960s. Before it was known for anything else, this was a Navy town. A port city of enlisted men's clubs, sticky floors and stages barely big enough to hold a drum kit. It was exactly the kind of place that either killed a musician's dreams or forged them into something indestructible. The Van Zant family had already staked their claim. Ronnie Van Zant was building Lynyrd Skynyrd into something monstrous and real, and the entire city could feel it. For Ronnie's younger brother Donnie, that proximity was both a gift and a burden. Donnie had spent years paying dues in local outfits, the Sons of Satan, Sweet Rooster, bands that worked hard and went nowhere. By 1974, the weight of all those dead ends had brought him to a crossroads. A stable railroad job was beginning to look like the smartest option he had. Ronnie wouldn't hear it. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. He told his brother that music was in his blood, that walking away would be the one mistake he could never take back. It wasn't just fraternal loyalty. Ronnie genuinely believed in what Donnie could build, and he backed it up by connecting the band to manager Peter Rudge, offering a runway that most Jacksonville musicians never got. The founding lineup was a collection of neighborhood men who had been grinding the same circuit for years. Don Barnes on vocals and guitar, a neighborhood friend of Donnie's who brought the melodic sensibility that would eventually define the band's biggest hits. Jeff Carlisi on guitar, an architecture student at Georgia Tech who had walked away from a safer future to take one last shot at the dream. Steve Brookins and Jack Grondin on drums, a dual drummer attack that gave the band immediate physical force. Their early years were, by Don Barnes' own description, a period of suffering and starving. Their first two albums, 38 Special in 1977 and Special Delivery in 1978, leaned heavily into the southern rock sound of whiskey and alligators. The problem was that the Allman Brothers and Lynyrd Skynyrd had already staked that territory. 38 Special wasn't distinguishing itself. It was standing in everyone else's shadow. Those albums were commercial failures. And then, in October 1977, the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash killed Ronnie Van Zant. The loss shattered Donnie. He channeled his grief into a song called Take Me Back, a tribute to his brother. But the band still had no identity of their own, and the genre that had birthed them was beginning to collapse under the weight of changing tastes. They were one bad decision away from becoming a footnote. Something had to change, and the men of 38 Special were self-aware enough to know it. The pivotal shift came when the band made a conscious decision to take the blinders off. The traditional Southern boogie sound was declining. Radio was changing. A new kind of rock, tighter, hookier, built for arena speakers and FM stations, was beginning to dominate. If 38 Special was going to survive, they had to evolve. The catalyst arrived in the form of John Kolodner, their representative, who made an introduction that would redirect the entire trajectory of the band. He connected them with Jim Petrick, the founder of Survivor, the man who would eventually co-write Eye of the Tiger. Petrick brought what 38 Special desperately needed: the ability to write a radio hook that lodged itself in your skull and refused to leave. The first product of this collaboration was Rockin' Into the Night. Petrick had originally written it for Survivor's debut album, but rejected it as too southern sounding. 38 Special recorded the track as a last-minute addition to their third album, and it became their first top 40 hit in 1980. It was modest by any standard, but it was proof of concept. The definitive breakthrough arrived with the 1981 album Wild-Eyed Southern Boys and the single Hold On Loosely. Co-written by Barnes, Carlisi, and Petrick, the song drew inspiration from an unlikely source: the minimalist, syncopated guitar style of The Cars, specifically Just What I Needed. Petrick described the concept as The Cars meets Lynyrd Skynyrd, and that tension, between cool northern art rock and raw southern grit turned out to be exactly what was missing from radio at that moment. Hold On Loosely reached number 27 on the Billboard Hot 100 and climbed to number 3 on the Album Rock Tracks chart. It was also one of the earliest videos played on MTV when the network launched in August 1981. They weren't just on the radio anymore. They were part of the visual language of a new era. Jeff Carlisi later reflected that with the success of Wild-Eyed Southern Boys, the band realized they had created something that would stand the test of time. They graduated from clubs to 5,000-seat venues. They became the premier support act on massive tours, opening for REO Speedwagon and earning their place among the legitimate forces of American rock. They were no longer Ronnie's Little Brothers band. They were 38 Special. By 1982, 38 Special had become something rare in the American rock landscape, a band you could count on. Every album yielded a hit. Every tour sold out. Every radio station seemed to have them on rotation. They had found their formula and were executing it with the precision of a machine built specifically for this purpose. Their 1982 album Special Forces peaked at number 10 on the Billboard 200, the highest position of any studio album they would ever release. The lead single, Caught Up in You, became their first top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. What made 38 Special remarkable during this era wasn't just the music, it was the work ethic that produced it. Don Barnes spoke often about the band's philosophy of persistence and determination. They had practiced for 4 hours every night after their day jobs during the lean early years, sacrificing personal milestones to remain 5 steps ahead of their competition. By the time success arrived, they didn't squander it. They treated every recording session as if the next album might be the last chance they ever got. The hits kept coming with almost mechanical consistency. If I'd Been the One in 1983 climbed the charts. Back Where You Belong reinforced the thesis. You Keep Running Away followed. Their 1983 album Tour de Force peaked at number 22 on the Billboard 200 and went platinum, proving the momentum wasn't fading. The internal brotherhood during this period was something the members spoke about with genuine reverence. These men had suffered and starved together, had survived the road and the rejections, and had watched each other refuse to quit even when quitting would have been the rational choice. There was a pride in that shared history, a kind of muscular loyalty that held the band together even as the external pressures of the industry mounted around them. Jim Peterick's collaboration remained central to their success, even as it created friction in his own professional life. He sometimes had to conceal his involvement with 38 Special from his Survivor bandmates, who resented the creative energy he directed elsewhere. He hid his contributions. And they kept charting. For a few years, 38 Special couldn't miss. The arenas filled, the radio played, the machine ran exactly as designed. But music was changing. And in the mid-1980s, it was changing faster than most bands could keep up with. Glam metal arrived with its theatrical excess. Synthesizers invaded the mainstream. MTV demanded a kind of visual branding that had nothing to do with the grit and discipline 38 Special had spent a decade perfecting. The landscape that had made them stars was being bulldozed, and a new one was rising in its place. One that didn't obviously have room for a band from Jacksonville who played honest, workmanlike rock. Their manager noted the shift with frustration. The band was still being perceived as just another Southern rock act, even as they had spent years deliberately moving away from that identity. Getting doors open was becoming harder. The image problem was real, and nobody in the industry seemed interested in helping them solve it. In response, the band modernized. They began presenting themselves more contemporarily, softening the rough-hewn Southern look in favor of something that would photograph better on a magazine cover. They pushed further into romantic pop rock, emphasizing the melodic side of their sound at the expense of the crunch that had first won them their audience. For the 1986 album Strength in Numbers, they brought in producer Keith Olsen, the man who had helmed classic Fleetwood Mac records, and adopted what Olsen described as a less is more philosophy. The album produced the top 20 hit Like No Other Night, but the overall momentum was stalling. The forward motion that had felt so inevitable during the Special Forces era now required more effort for smaller returns. Don Barnes later described those years as a long, hard fight, the fight to be accepted as a general American pop rock band rather than a regional curiosity. The band worked. They always worked. But the industry wasn't listening the way it once had. Then came the fracture that changed everything. In 1987, Don Barnes left 38 Special to pursue a solo career. Barnes had been the voice of the band's biggest hits, the melodic center around which everything else was organized. His departure left a void that couldn't easily be filled. He recorded a solo album called Ride the Storm, but his label was sold before the album could be released, and the new staff had no emotional investment in the project. It sat on a shelf for 28 years. Barnes was gone, and the machine began to sputter. The band didn't collapse. That was the thing about 38 Special. They never gave anyone the satisfaction of a dramatic implosion. Instead, they adapted. They recruited Max Carl, a vocalist with a soulful, R&B inflected style, to join Donnie Van Zant and Jeff Carlisi. And then, against all reasonable expectation, they had a hit. Second Chance, released in 1989 from the album Rock and Roll Strategy, became the highest charting single of the band's entire career, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart in 1989. By any commercial metric, it was their greatest success. But it was also, in the deepest sense, the moment they lost themselves. Second Chance was a soulful ballad, warm, generous, built on regret and forgiveness. It was a beautiful song. It just didn't sound like 38 Special. Not the 38 Special that had packed arenas with the raw urgency of Hold On Loosely or the driving confidence of Caught Up in You. Jeff Carlisi captured the irony precisely. Despite being their biggest commercial hit, nobody ever said Second Chance when the band's name came up. The fans still wanted the 1980s rockers. The radio hit had arrived at the cost of the very identity that made them who they were. The label didn't renew their contract, and the grunge wave that crested in the early 1990s made the entire sound feel like it belonged to a different civilization. Bands like 38 Special, with their melodic and arena-tested sound, found themselves stranded in a landscape that had simply decided to move on without them. Their 1991 album Bone Against Steel reached only number 170 on the Billboard 200. The single, The Sound of Your Voice, climbed to number 2 on the mainstream rock chart, proof that the talent was still there, that the craftsmen were still working. But the mainstream Hot 100 had moved on. It was their last significant appearance on that chart. They didn't break, they faded. And in some ways, fading is harder than breaking. A break gives you a story, a cause, a villain, a defining moment. A fade gives you silence and the slow realization that the phone has stopped ringing with the urgency it once carried. Don Barnes came back in 1992. The voice returned, and with it came the signature sound that audiences still craved. The reunion was quiet, no fanfare, no major label campaign, but it stabilized the band and gave them something real to rally around. They had survived worse. What followed was the longest chapter of their story, and in some ways the most honest one. 38 Special became a road warrior act, a band that played not because a label demanded it, but because stopping would mean admitting it was over, and they weren't ready for that. They transitioned from 20,000-seat arenas to theaters, county fairs, and summer festivals. Ticket prices stayed accessible. The production scaled back. But the playing, the actual connection between these musicians and the people who had loved them since the early 1980s, never diminished. Jeff Carlisi left in 1997, quietly closing another door on what the band had been at its peak. The lineup kept shifting, kept finding ways to continue. And through all of it, Donnie Van Zant remained the emotional anchor, the connection to Ronnie, to Jacksonville, to the original dream that had started with nothing but a railroad job he almost took. Then, in 2013, doctors delivered news that couldn't be argued with or worked around. Donnie was suffering from severe inner ear nerve damage, and he was ordered off the stage. The man who had started the band, who had been the earthier complement to Barnes's melodic lead, who had carried his brother's memory every time he walked into a spotlight, could no longer perform. Don Barnes stepped forward. The band kept touring, over 100 cities a year, year after year, playing the songs that people still needed. The original heartbeat was gone, but the music went on. As of their 50th anniversary in 2025, 38 Special released Milestone, their first studio album in over 2 decades. It was a quiet declaration that they were still standing, still working, still believing the music was worth it. There's a certain kind of legacy that doesn't come with a ceremony or a museum exhibit. It lived in the dashboard of a car at 70 miles an hour. It lived on a classic rock station, playing the same songs from the same years, with the same undiminished conviction that those songs still mattered. Because they did.
I want you back where you belong.
Hold On loosely accumulated tens of millions of plays on YouTube Music. It appeared on classic rock playlists everywhere, not because a label promoted it, but because people kept choosing it. Because the feeling it carried, that specific tension between wanting to hold on and knowing you had to let go, never went out of style. Human beings don't stop needing that idea just because the decade changes. Caught Up in You was the sound of summer for a generation of men who were now in their 60s, who could still remember what it felt like to be young and certain and driving somewhere that seemed important. Fantasy Girl, If I'd Been the One. These weren't just songs, they were documents of a particular American feeling, proud, romantic, imperfect, and stubbornly alive. Don Barnes described the ability to see happy faces every night, people who still came out to hear music created decades ago and left feeling something real, as a source of immense pride. Not the pride of conquest, but the quieter pride of endurance, of having done something that lasted longer than the spotlight did. The industry moved on. Radio formats changed. Labels lost interest. The phone stopped ringing with the urgency it once carried. But the songs stayed. They found their way into the private rituals of people who needed them. The long drives, the late nights, the moments of unexpected emotion that only music can unlock. 38 Special was a hit-making machine that the world eventually left behind. But the music, the best of it, the truest of it, never stopped running. 38 Special proved that endurance is its own kind of greatness. Born in tragedy, built in obscurity, they briefly touched something universal, a run of hits that defined an era. When the spotlight moved on, they didn't shatter. They quietly kept going. What's your memory of 38 Special? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.